Clara didn't see the step. 1 second, she was rushing down the hallway, clutching a stack of files and trying not to spill the coffee in her hand. The next second, her heel caught the edge of the floor. Her body lurched forward. The conference room door flew open, and suddenly she was falling. Everything happened so fast that Clara barely had time to gasp before she crashed into something warm and solid. Not the floor, not a chair, someone. Her files scattered across the polished table. Coffee splashed onto the carpet, and Clara realized, with a horrifying jolt, that she was sitting on someone's lap. The entire conference room went silent. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head. The man beneath her was tall, broad-shouldered, and very still. His dark eyes were looking straight into hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. Clara felt the heat rush to her face. She could feel his steady breathing beneath her, the warmth of his body, the firm strength of the arms that had instinctively caught her before she hit the ground. Someone in the room cleared their throat. Then another voice whispered from the far side of the table. "Clara!" She turned her head slowly. Every single person in the department was staring at her. Some looked shocked. Some looked amused. Some looked like they were trying very hard not to laugh. Then someone muttered the words that made Clara's heart completely stop. "That's the new director. The new director." Clara's stomach dropped. Her eyes snapped back to the man she was still sitting on. Up close, he looked even more intimidating. Sharp jawline, calm expression, perfectly pressed black suit, and the quiet authority of someone used to being in control. The Korean man didn't say a word. He simply raised one eyebrow slightly. Clara scrambled to her feet, so quickly she almost fell again. "I'm so sorry," she blurted, her voice shaking. "I didn't see the step. The chair, I mean." She stopped talking, because now she sounded even more ridiculous. The room was still silent. Clara could practically hear her career collapsing around her. First day, first meeting, and she had just landed on her boss's lap in front of the entire office. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. She grabbed her fallen files with trembling hands, wishing the ground would open and swallow her whole. "I truly apologize," she said again, forcing the words out. "It was an accident." The Korean man finally stood. He was even taller than she expected. For a moment, Clara thought he might be angry. But instead, he simply adjusted his suit jacket. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, calm, controlled. "It appears so." His English carried a faint Korean accent, smooth and precise. The room relaxed slightly. A few people shifted in their chairs. Clara dared to look up again. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on her for half a second longer than necessary. Then he turned toward the table. "Let's begin the meeting." Just like that. No lecture, no anger, nothing. Clara sank into the nearest chair, her face still burning. She could barely focus on anything the rest of the meeting. Her mind kept replaying the moment over and over again. The fall, the warmth of his body, the way his arms had caught her without hesitation, and the look in his eyes when she realized who he was. She tried to focus on the presentation slides, but it was impossible. Every time she glanced across the table, she could feel his presence. The new director, the man whose lap she had just fallen onto. His name, she soon learned, was Ji-hoon Park, and he had just transferred from the company's Seoul headquarters to lead their international development team, which meant one very unfortunate thing. He was now her boss. The meeting ended an hour later. Clara packed her things quickly, hoping to escape before anyone started asking questions. No such luck. The moment she stepped into the hallway, 2 coworkers rushed toward her. "Clara!" one of them whispered loudly. "Oh my goodness! That was legendary." "I'm going to die," Clara muttered. "No, you're not," the other coworker laughed. "You just made the most dramatic first impression in company history." "That wasn't a first impression," Clara groaned. "That was a disaster." They walked together toward the elevators, but Clara could already hear whispers spreading down the corridor. "Did you see what happened? She literally fell on him, right on his lap." She must be mortified. Mortified didn't even begin to describe how she felt. When the elevator doors finally opened, Clara slipped inside and leaned against the wall. The ride down felt endless. Her mind kept replaying the moment again and again. The silence, the stairs, and the strange way Director Park had looked at her before speaking. Calm, almost curious, the elevator doors opened. Clara stepped out into the lobby, determined to survive the rest of the day quietly. But fate clearly had other plans, because the moment she reached the building entrance, someone stepped in front of her. She froze. Director Park. He stood there holding a folder, his expression composed. Clara's heart began racing again. Director Park, she said quickly, bowing slightly. I wanted to apologize again for earlier. For a moment, he simply studied her. His gaze was steady, observant. Clara felt strangely aware of how close he was standing. Then he spoke. You've already apologized. His tone was calm, but there was something softer in his voice now. Clara nodded awkwardly. Yes. Still, it was very unprofessional. Director Park tilted his head slightly. Running late is unprofessional, he said. Clara winced. But accidents, he added after a moment, are human. She blinked in surprise. He wasn't angry. If anything, he seemed amused. The thought made her even more embarrassed. I'll be more careful in the future, she said quickly. A small pause passed between them. Then something unexpected happened. Director Park smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his entire expression. For a moment, Clara felt a strange flutter in her chest. Then he spoke again. Perhaps, he said quietly, we should both watch where we're sitting next time. Clara's face turned red all over again. Director Park gave a short nod. Then he stepped past her and walked out into the afternoon sunlight, leaving Clara standing there completely stunned. For the rest of the week, Clara did everything possible to avoid Director Park. She arrived early. She left meetings quickly. She even started taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Anything to prevent another awkward moment. But avoiding someone in the same department was nearly impossible. Every time she thought she was safe, she would catch a glimpse of him across the office, standing near the glass conference rooms, speaking calmly with managers, or walking down the hallway with that same quiet confidence. And every single time, Clara's mind replayed the same memory. The moment she had fallen, the moment she had realized where she was sitting, his lap, her cheeks would immediately burn again. By Friday morning, the entire office still knew about it. Coworkers didn't mention it directly, but the teasing smiles were obvious. Someone had even jokingly started calling the incident the lap meeting. Clara wanted to disappear. That morning, she stayed late finishing a report. By the time she packed her bag and left her desk, the office was almost empty. Good. Less people meant fewer embarrassing conversations. She walked toward the elevator and pressed the button. The doors opened with a soft sound. Clara stepped inside. Just as the doors began closing, a hand stopped them. Her heart dropped. Director Park stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut behind them. Now it was just the two of them. Clara suddenly became very aware of the quiet space. The elevator felt smaller than usual. She stared straight ahead at the numbers above the door. Maybe if she stayed quiet, the ride would end quickly. But the silence stretched longer and longer. Then Director Park spoke. You've been avoiding the elevators. Clara blinked. She slowly turned her head toward him. His dark eyes met hers. There was no accusation in his voice, just observation. She started, then stopped. There was no point lying. Maybe. To her surprise, he let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. You realize we work in the same building. Clara sighed softly. Yes, I know. The elevator continued moving down. A strange tension filled the air. Not angry, not uncomfortable exactly, just intense. Clara became aware of how close he was standing. The elevator wasn't crowded, but the quiet made every small movement noticeable. Director Park leaned slightly against the wall, studying her. You work hard, he said suddenly. Clara looked at him again. That report you submitted yesterday, he continued, was impressive. Her eyes widened. You read it. Of course. Clara hadn't expected that. Most directors rarely looked at junior staff reports personally. Thank you, she said quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the elevator jolted. Hard. The lights flickered once, and the elevator stopped moving. Clara's stomach dropped. Oh no! The emergency lights turned on, casting a dim glow across the small space. The elevator was stuck. She looked at Director Park. He was already pressing the emergency button. A voice came through the speaker. "Maintenance is on the way. Please remain calm. Remain calm." Easy for them to say. Clara let out a small nervous laugh. Of course this would happen today. Director Park glanced at her. "Why today?" She hesitated. Then she sighed. "Because if something embarrassing can happen around you, it usually does." For a moment he said nothing. Then his lips curved slightly again. That same faint smile. "You seem very certain of that." Clara leaned back against the wall. "Well, my evidence is strong." Director Park crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Yes. Falling on your boss during your first meeting is strong evidence." Clara groaned softly. "You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" "On the contrary," he said calmly. "I already have." She looked at him, surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "It was an accident." His voice softened slightly. "You seem more bothered by it than anyone else." Clara looked down at the floor. First impressions matter. Director Park studied her for a moment. Then he spoke again. "Then let me give you another one." She looked up. "What?" "Another first impression," he repeated. Clara frowned slightly. "How?" He stepped closer. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just close enough that the small elevator suddenly felt even smaller. His presence filled the space. His voice was quieter now. "You're intelligent," he said. "Focused. And clearly dedicated to your work." Clara felt her heartbeat speed up. "No one is judging you for an accident." His gaze held hers. "If anything, the department now remembers your name." Clara couldn't help it. She laughed. A real laugh this time. "Not exactly the reputation I was hoping for." Director Park's eyes softened. Reputations can change. Another quiet moment passed between them. The air in the elevator felt warmer now. Clara realized she wasn't nervous anymore. Instead, she felt strangely comfortable, like the tension between them had shifted. Then the elevator suddenly jerked again. The lights flickered back to full brightness. The doors opened. Maintenance workers waited outside. "You're all set," one of them said. Clara stepped out first. Director Park followed. For a moment they stood in the hallway together. Clara adjusted her bag. "Well," she said awkwardly, "that was memorable." Director Park nodded slightly. "Yes." Then he added something that made her heart skip again. "Not as memorable as our first meeting." Clara shook her head with a small smile. "Please don't remind me." He studied her expression for a moment. Then he spoke again. "There's a project meeting Monday morning." Clara straightened slightly. "Yes. You'll be joining the team." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes." He handed her a folder. "I'd like your input." Clara took the folder slowly. This was a huge opportunity. "Thank you, Director Park." He gave a small nod. Then he turned and walked down the hallway. Clara watched him go. Her mind was spinning. The awkward tension between them hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had changed, grown stronger, more complicated. And for the first time since the accident, Clara realized something surprising. The man she had been trying so hard to avoid might actually become the person she worked closest with. And somehow, that idea didn't scare her anymore. But neither of them realized yet that the real challenge wasn't the embarrassment, or the gossip, or even working together. The real challenge would be what started to grow between them. Something neither of them expected. Something the entire office would soon begin to notice. Monday morning arrived faster than Clara expected. She barely slept the night before. Not because of work, but because of Director Park, or more specifically, the elevator conversation. Something about it had changed the way she saw him. Before, he was just the quiet Korean director she had embarrassed herself in front of. Now he felt different. More human. More mysterious. More dangerous to her concentration. Clara shook the thought away as she stepped into the office building. "Focus on work," she told herself. Nothing else. When she reached her desk, the folder Director Park had given her was already open on the table. The project was big. Very big. It was a new international partnership the company had been trying to secure for months. And according to the meeting schedule, Clara was now officially part of the team. Her heart pounded. This was the kind of opportunity employees waited years for. Yet it also meant one thing. She would be working directly with Director Park. Again. At 9 a.m., the The team gathered in the main conference room. Clara entered carefully this time. Very carefully. No rushing. No missteps. No falling. The moment she walked in, a few coworkers exchanged amused glances. One of them whispered jokingly, "Careful with the chairs today." Clara rolled her eyes but smiled politely. At least the teasing felt lighter now. When Director Park entered the room, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Everyone straightened. He placed his tablet on the table and looked around the room. His eyes paused on Clara for a brief moment, not long that beat just enough to acknowledge her. Then the meeting began. He spoke clearly, confidently, outlining the new project goals. Clara tried to focus on the presentation, but she couldn't help noticing the way he worked. Director Park wasn't loud. He didn't dominate the room. Yet somehow everyone listened. Every word he said felt precise and intentional. At one point he asked for suggestions from the team. A few managers spoke. Then the room fell quiet. Clara hesitated. She had an idea, but speaking up in front of senior staff was intimidating. Director Park looked directly at her. "Clara!" Her heart jumped. "Yes. You reviewed the partnership proposal this weekend." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Clara nodded slowly. "I did. What do you think?" Every eye in the room turned toward her. Her palms felt slightly sweaty, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Well," she began carefully, "the strategy is strong, but the communication plan could be improved." Director Park leaned back slightly. "Explain." Clara opened her notebook. As she spoke, her nervousness slowly faded. She explained how the company could better connect with international clients, especially in African markets. The room became quiet again. Not awkward quiet, interested quiet. When she finished, Director Park nodded slowly. "That's a valuable perspective." He turned to the rest of the team. "We'll incorporate her suggestion." Clara blinked in surprise. Just like that. No debate. No hesitation. He trusted her input. A few coworkers exchanged looks. One of them didn't look pleased. His name was Daniel. Daniel had worked at the company longer than Clara, and from the expression on his face, he clearly didn't appreciate the attention she was receiving. The meeting continued for another hour. When it ended, people gathered their things and began leaving. Clara packed her notebook, feeling strangely energized. Before she could stand up, a voice spoke behind her. "Impressive presentation." She turned. Director Park stood there. Up close, he seemed even taller. His expression remained calm, but his eyes held that same thoughtful look she remembered from the elevator. "Thank you," Clara said softly. "You were nervous," he added. She laughed quietly. "Very. But you still spoke." Clara shrugged slightly. "I figured I had already embarrassed myself enough for one lifetime." For a brief second, Director Park's lips curved again. That small, rare smile. "You're recovering well." Clara felt a warm rush in her chest. Then someone cleared their throat loudly behind them. "Daniel." He stepped forward, his expression tight. "Director Park, we need to review the budget estimates." Director Park nodded. "Send them to my office." Daniel glanced briefly at Clara before leaving the room. The look wasn't friendly. Clara noticed it immediately. Director Park seemed to notice too. He turned back to her. "Office dynamics can be complicated," he said calmly. Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's one way to describe it." He studied her expression for a moment. "Don't let it distract you." "I won't." Director Park nodded once more. Then he left the conference room. Clara watched him go. She couldn't deny it anymore. Working with him was going to be interesting. Over the next 2 weeks, the project moved quickly. Clara and Director Park worked together often. Sometimes in meetings. Sometimes reviewing reports. Sometimes late in the office after most employees had gone home. At first their interactions remained professional, but the tension between them slowly changed. It became easier to talk, easier to laugh. Sometimes they would exchange quick comments during meetings. Small jokes, quiet, observations, the kind that only the two of them seemed to notice. Unfortunately, the rest of the office noticed too. Whispers began spreading again. Not about the lap incident this time. About something else. Director Park always asks for Clara's opinion. They work late together a lot. Maybe that accident wasn't just an accident. Clara tried to ignore the gossip, but one afternoon things became more serious. The team gathered to review a critical report. Daniel presented the data. Halfway through, he paused. "There's a problem," he said. The room grew quiet. "What problem?" Director Park asked. Daniel tapped the screen. "The numbers in the partnership proposal are incorrect." Clara frowned. That didn't make sense. She had personally checked those numbers. Daniel continued. "The errors came from Clara's report." A heavy silence filled the room. All eyes turned toward her. Clara's heart started pounding. "That's not possible," she said. Daniel shrugged slightly. "The data says otherwise." Director Park didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the screen. He studied the numbers carefully. Then he turned toward Clara. "Did you prepare this report?" "Yes." "And you verified the data?" "3 times." Another quiet moment passed. Then Director Park looked back at the screen. "These numbers were altered." Daniel blinked. "What?" Director Park pointed to the figures. The formatting changed after submission. His gaze shifted toward Daniel, who accessed the file after Clara submitted it. The room became extremely quiet. Daniel looked uncomfortable. "I may have opened it to review." Director Park's voice remained calm. "Did you edit anything?" Daniel hesitated. Clara felt a strange tension building. Finally, Daniel muttered something under his breath. "I adjusted a few things." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "You changed my report." "I was fixing it," Daniel said defensively. Director Park's expression hardened slightly. "You created the error." The room remained silent. Then Director Park spoke clearly. "The original report stands." He turned toward Clara. "Your work was correct." A wave of relief rushed through her. But what surprised her most was something else. Director Park had trusted her. Immediately, without hesitation. And everyone in the room had seen it. That evening, Clara stayed late finishing another task. The office was quiet. Most lights were off. She gathered her things and walked toward the exit. As she passed Director Park's office, the door opened. He stepped out. "You're still here." Clara smiled tiredly. "Just finishing the report." He studied her face. "You handled the situation well today." Clara shrugged. "I didn't do anything." "You stayed calm." She hesitated. "Thank you for backing me up." Director Park leaned lightly against the wall. "I didn't back you up." Clara looked confused. "Yes, you did." "No," he said quietly. "I trusted you." Their eyes met. For a moment the hallway felt strangely still. Clara felt that familiar flutter again. The same feeling she had experienced in the elevator. Director Park straightened. "Go home," he said softly. "You've worked enough today." Clara nodded. "Good night, Director Park." She walked toward the exit, but as she stepped outside into the cool evening air, one thought kept repeating in her mind. The tension between them was growing. Stronger, deeper, and neither of them seemed able to stop it. But what Clara didn't realize yet was that the real turning point in their story was still coming. And it would happen late one night in the office, when the two of them would be left completely alone. The office was almost completely silent that night. Clara didn't even realize how late it had gotten until she looked up from her screen and noticed most of the lights had already been turned off. Only a few dim ones remained, casting soft shadows across the empty desks. She stretched slightly, rolling her shoulders as she tried to shake off the tiredness. The project deadline was getting closer, and every detail mattered. She glanced at the clock again and sighed softly. "I should go," she whispered to herself, but instead of shutting down her computer, she kept working. Just a few more minutes, that's what she told herself. 0.5 minutes turned into 20, then 30. Then she heard footsteps. Clara froze for a second before slowly turning her head. Director Park was walking toward her. Her heart skipped. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore, just a simple white shirt with the sleeves slightly rolled up. And somehow, that made him look even more dangerous. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made her suddenly very aware of his presence. He stopped beside her desk. "You're still here." His voice was softer than usual in the quiet office. Clara nodded. "I wanted to finish this section." He glanced at her screen, then back at her. "You've already done enough today." Clara gave a small smile. "I like finishing what I start." For a moment, he didn't respond. He just looked at her, and the silence between them felt different from before. Not awkward, not tense in a bad way, but heavy, with something neither of them was saying. Then he pulled a chair and sat beside her. Clara's breath caught slightly. That was new. He had never sat this close before. The space between them felt smaller, the air warmer. She could hear the faint sound of his breathing, steady and calm. "Show me," he said quietly. Clara blinked. "What?" "The report." She turned back to her screen, trying to focus, but it was suddenly harder. His presence beside her made everything feel more intense. Every small movement felt noticeable. When she reached for her mouse, her hand brushed lightly against his. She froze. The contact was brief, but it sent a sudden rush of warmth through her. Clara pulled her hand back quickly. "Sorry." "It's fine," he said calmly, but his voice had changed slightly, lower, quieter. She continued explaining the report, her voice softer now that he listened closely, occasionally asking questions. And every time he leaned slightly closer to look at the screen, Clara felt her heart beat faster. That IT wasn't just awareness anymore, that IT was something deeper, something pulling at her attention in a way she couldn't ignore. After a while, she stopped talking. "That's all," she said quietly. He didn't respond. Immediately, Clara turned her head slightly and realized how close he was. His face was only inches away from hers. For a second, neither of them moved. The world outside the office felt like it had disappeared. Clara could feel the warmth of his presence again, just like that first day. But this time, she wasn't panicking. She was aware, and that made it even more dangerous. His eyes held hers, steadied, searching, as if he was trying to understand something he hadn't quite figured out yet. Clara's breath caught. "Director Park," she started softly, but her voice faded. He didn't move away. Instead, he spoke quietly. "Do you remember that day?" Clara blinked. "Which day?" His gaze didn't leave hers. "The meeting." Her heart skipped. How could I forget? For a brief moment, something changed in his expression, something softer. "You were late," he said. "You were running." Clara nodded slowly. "Yes." "You looked," he paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Determined." Clara wasn't expecting that. She let out a small breath. "Determined to embarrass myself, maybe." He shook his head slightly. No, his voice was calm, but there was something deeper in it. "Determined not to fail." Clara felt something shift inside her. He continued. "Everyone else walked into that room prepared." His eyes held hers. "You walked in fighting." The words hit her in a way she didn't expect. No one had ever described her like that before. Clara swallowed softly. "And then I fell," she said quietly. That a faint hint of amusement touched his expression. "Yes." For the first time, she saw it clearly. That he wasn't remembering it with embarrassment. He was remembering it differently. "Why didn't you get angry?" she asked suddenly. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Should I have?" "Most bosses would have." He considered that for a moment. "Maybe." Then he looked at her again. "But most people wouldn't have stood up the way you did afterward." Clara frowned slightly. "I was just apologizing." "No," he said quietly. "You were trying to recover." Their eyes locked again, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. Clara felt it again, that pull, that tension that had been building between them for weeks now. It was no longer just awkwardness. It was something real, something undeniable. "You notice a lot," she said softly. He didn't deny it. "I observe what matters." The way he said it made her heart beat faster. Clara looked down for a moment, trying to steady herself. But when she looked back up, he was still watching her. That same steady gaze, that same quiet intensity. The distance between them hadn't changed, but everything else had. "We should go," she said suddenly. Her voice was softer now. He didn't move right away. For a second, she thought he might say something else, but then he stood up. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She quickly shut down her computer and gathered her things. They walked toward the elevator together in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was full of thoughts, unspoken words, and something neither of them was ready to name yet. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped inside. The space felt familiar now, but the tension felt stronger. Clara stood facing forward, her heart still not completely steady. She could feel his presence beside her again, and this time it didn't feel accidental. It felt intentional. The elevator began to move. "Clara." Her name and his voice made her turn slightly. "Yes." There was a brief pause. Then he said quietly, "You don't need to avoid me anymore." Her breath caught. "I wasn't. You were," he said calmly, but there was no accusation in his tone, just certainty. Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she exhaled softly. "Maybe I was." He nodded once. "You don't have to." The elevator doors opened. Clara stepped out first. But as she walked toward the exit, she realized something she could no longer ignore. The awkwardness between them was gone, and its place was something else. Something deeper. Something that made every moment around him feel different. And as she stepped into the cool night air once again, Clara knew one thing for sure. This story had moved far beyond an embarrassing accident. And whatever was growing between them was only just beginning. The days that followed felt different. Clara noticed it immediately. Nothing dramatic had changed on the surface. The office was still the same, the work was still demanding, people still whispered, but something between her and Director Park had shifted completely, and there was no going back. They spoke more now, not just about work, small conversations. Short moments that somehow meant more than they should. A glance across the room, a quiet comment during meetings, a brief pause that lingered longer than necessary. And every time Clara felt it, that same pull, that same quiet tension that had started in the elevator and grown stronger that night in the office. It was no longer something she could ignore, and she had a feeling he couldn't either. One evening, the team gathered for the final project presentation. The room was full, the energy tense. This was the moment everything would be decided. Clara sat at the table, her hands resting lightly on her notes. She had worked harder on this project than anything before, and tonight it all came down to this. Director Park stood at the front of the room. Calm as always, he began the presentation with confidence, guiding the room through each detail. When it was time for Clara's section, he paused. Then he looked directly at her. Clara. Her heart skipped. She stood, steadying herself. And then she began. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear, no second-guessing. She spoke clearly, confidently, owning every word. The room listened carefully, and when she finished, there was a brief silence before the clients began nodding. One of them smiled. That was excellent. Relief washed over her. The rest of the presentation went smoothly. By the end, the partnership was secured. The room filled with quiet applause. People shook hands. Smiles spread across faces. It was a success, a real one. But for Clara, something else mattered more. As the room slowly emptied, she gathered her things, her heart still racing. Not from nerves this time, but from something else. She stepped out into the hallway, needing a moment to breathe. Clara! She turned. Director Park was standing behind her. His expression was calm, but there was something deeper in his eyes tonight, something certain. You did well, he said. She smiled softly. We did? He stepped closer, and just like that night in the office, the space between them shifted again. There's something I need to say, he said quietly. Clara's heart began to pound again, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. From the first day, he continued, his voice steady, you stood out. Clara let out a small breath. Because I fell on you? A faint smile touched his lips. Not just that. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. You were unprepared, and yet you refused to disappear. Her chest tightened slightly. Most people would have avoided me after that, he added. You didn't. Clara swallowed. I tried. His eyes held hers. Not enough. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Silence settled between them again, but this time, it wasn't uncertain. It felt like something reaching its edge. Why didn't you stop this? Clara asked softly. He didn't pretend not to understand. Stop what? This, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever this is between us. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped closer. One step, the distance between them almost gone. Because I didn't want to, he said simply. Clara's breath caught. The honesty in his voice left no room to hide her own feelings anymore. Ji-hoon, she said softly, his name leaving her lips for the first time. He didn't react strongly, but something in his eyes changed. It softened, and that was all it took. This could be complicated, she continued quietly. Office rules, people talking, people will always talk, he interrupted calmly. That hasn't stopped them before. Clara let out a small, nervous laugh. He wasn't wrong, but this felt bigger than gossip. What if this changes things? She asked. He held her gaze. It already has. The words settled between them. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't avoiding it. He was accepting it. And somehow, that made everything clearer. Clara looked down for a moment, gathering her thoughts. But when she looked back up, she knew the truth. She had felt it from the beginning. From that first moment. From the elevator. From the late nights. From the way he looked at her. This wasn't just tension, that it wasn't just curiosity, that it was something real, and it had been growing quietly between them all along. That day, Ji-hoon said softly, when you fell. Clara shook her head with a small smile. Please don't remind me again. But he continued. That day changed everything. She blinked. For you. He nodded once. For me. Her heart skipped. Why? He didn't look away. Because it was the first time in a long time that something unexpected happened. His voice was calm, but his words carried something deeper, and I realized, he paused briefly, that not everything needs to be controlled. Clara felt her chest tighten again. This wasn't just about her, this was about him too, about something he hadn't said out loud until now. The silence stretched, but it felt full, complete. Then slowly, carefully, Clara took a small step closer too, not rushing, not hesitating, just enough to close the distance completely. She could feel the warmth of him again. Not accidental this time. Not forced, intentional. Her voice was soft when she spoke. So what happens now? Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, now we stop pretending this is nothing. Clara's heart pounded, but she didn't look away. And he held her gaze. And we see where it goes. A slow smile formed on her lips. For the first time since that embarrassing day, there was no fear, no panic, no regret. Just something calm, something certain. Okay, she said softly. And just like that, everything changed. Not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, but in something deeper, something steady. In the weeks that followed, the office still talked, but it didn't matter anymore. Clara continued to grow in her role, more confident, more respected. And Ji-hoon, he didn't hide his support, not loudly, not unprofessionally, but in quiet ways that meant more than anything else. Shared glances, small conversations, moments that belonged only to them. And sometimes when the office grew quiet late at night, Clara would sit at her desk, working, and remember that first day. She would smile to herself, because the most embarrassing moment of her life, the moment she thought had ruined everything, had actually been the beginning of something she never expected, something she never planned, something she never saw coming. And somehow that made it even more perfect, because sometimes all it takes is one misstep to fall into the right place.